I've never thought all that much of snow, to be honest. Not even when I was a kid. When I saw that the snow had fallen, my first thought was, and still is, how much of a nightmare it's going to become when it stops and everything turns into ice. I mean, sure, it looks pretty, but ugh. If only the snow could just go away forever. Or what if it was the other way around? What if the snow never stopped? Then you'd have nothing but the good parts, wouldn't you? The snow would never turn into ice. Everyone would always be outside, playing. We'd be walking in a winter wonderland 365 days a year. Hell, everything would get so festive they'd have to make Christmas a monthly thing. Most children always dream of the snow lasting forever. And in Wizzard and Alice, you can see what might happen if the snow did last forever. An eternal winter wonderland, where the whole infrastructure has collapsed, there's no more food, violent gangs have formed, and the ordinary people do whatever they can to survive another 24 hours. I mean, the way that the news always reports on even the tiniest of snow flurries should have clued you in, I guess. If the snow never stopped, there'd be panic, chaos and apocalypse. Alas, the dreams of children aren't usually all that logical. Wizzard and Alice focuses on two people who get caught up in this chaos and follows them through a point-and-click adventure game. They both start out in perhaps the safest place they could possibly be in, an underground prison. Sure, you're trapped inside four enclosed walls with no windows, no sunlight, nothing organic at all, but at least it's warm and there's even a few luxuries to boot. Whether you're in for desertion, like Wizzard, or murder, like Alice, at least you're safe. And they have each other to open up to. Alice comes into Wizzard's life and she takes the reins. There's a neat little balance with Alice being new and still getting used to her situation, whereas Wizzard is somewhat institutionalised and even comfortable with his lot. So while there is a bit of duality in the title, this is largely the story of how Alice arrived at the prison. And hoo boy, it's heavy going. Let's just deal with some things right off the bat here. Wizzard and Alice is not an uplifting game. It might just be one of the most downcast games I've ever played, in fact. Of course, you don't usually come to post-apocalyptic stories expecting sunshine, lollipops and rainbows, but yeah, this one is quite affecting at times and it deals with some very heavy and very upsetting themes. It deals with them well, too. Crushingly so. Even as someone who does okay with such stories, there were times when I almost wanted to stop, actively wishing things wouldn't happen the way they clearly, well, had to happen almost. But let's get into it. There's lots to talk about, but I think I can get away with just a minor spoiler warning. I highly recommend Wizzard and Alice for any fan of post-apocalyptic stuff or of hefty dramas in general, but you should be aware of some of the themes that it contains within, such as being imprisoned against your will, the relationship between mother and child, and the lengths people go to protect that. The core of the story is spent following Alice and her 5.5-year-old son, Barney. The relationship between the two and the dialogue they share is where the game shines so. Simply put, it's a wonderful portrayal of a mother and her son. Probing further, it's a mother who is trying to be everything to her son all at once. She's the doting mother, but she's also the protective father, trying to be the one figure that Barney lacks, sheltering him from the horrors of the outside while trying to make sure that he doesn't go through life totally scared. Where there's Barney, there's hope. The snow may stop and life will eventually return to normal. Everyone wishes for this. Even back in the prison you see some of the pleasure that Wizzard and Alice take in something as menial and as mindless as cleaning. On the outside there's nothing like that. Surviving the night kinda takes precedence. Still, Alice does try to bring some of it into Barney's life. She doesn't want to constantly be on the move, she wants to find a home, somewhere safe where they won't be disturbed. Even if she knows how unlikely that is, she's got to keep spinning those plates. It reminds me a lot of The Road by Cormac McCarthy, amongst other stories, but with quite a lot more dialogue. But that dialogue, it just crackles. It feels so natural, has such quiet power and poignancy in parts. Barney in particular is so believable as a character, the little quirks of his speech so well placed. He's one of the most believable child characters I've ever found in such a game. He does have talents, but really, he's just a normal child in an abnormal situation. The same way that Alice is normal too, with the dreams she had of becoming a librarian and illustrating children's books, even though she can't draw. One of the most powerful aspects of Wizzard and Alice is that you seldom see the typical post-apocalyptic characters you would expect. You don't have the bro-beaten every man or woman who happens to be an expert survivalist. No one's going to effortlessly hold all this shit together, but then no one you see is specifically trying to hunt you down either. The characters you see are normal people, without any grand ambitions or flashes of genius. They're people you can relate to. Hell, they could be you and me in the same situation. Wizzard and Alice isn't a story about the mythical lone wanderer from afar, it's a story about the weakling settlers doing everything they can in order to survive, and it's a testament to the ability of co-creators Lewis Denby and Ashton Ways that they pulled it off so well. So everything does sound kinda heavy so far, but there are also moments of brevity, and they usually come inside the prison. Wizzard himself facilitates the story, but has some nice little quirks of his own, and a great relationship with Alice. For the majority of the game, it's kind of intriguing to play as a prisoner who is actually quite comfortable where they are. Because, think about it, how often does that happen? If you're in a game and you're in a cell, there's usually only one objective, and that's to get the hell out of there. Wizzard, meanwhile, has much more important problems to deal with, such as turning the temperature down on his environmental control unit. Although, maybe he should just submit a support ticket instead in the vain hope that a guard might come along. There's a fine chemistry between Wizzard and Alice, with Wizzard gradually opening up more and more. He's understandably not the best at small talk considering that he's been stuck in a cell for quite a while now, but he doesn't do too bad. When I was playing the game, I could almost envisage it as a little play, cutting the stage in half with the two characters on either side, separate yet getting ever closer with each other, even as the story gets darker and darker. The moments in prison do serve a very good purpose, breaking up the main story for some little moments that are a bit more light-hearted in nature and give the heavier stuff space to breathe. And gee, you even get a fantastic reference to Analog a Hate Story in the middle of it all. I mean, that sort of thing could bump the rating score up by at least 10 points, if I had such things, that is. When it comes to story and dialogue, Wizzard and Alice just shines. The 3 hours I spent with the game were a whole rollercoaster of emotions and feels, and once I'd started it I couldn't possibly quit. Nothing else mattered, I just had to see it through to the very end. That said, there are some negatives that should be pointed out that might turn off some adventure game fans, depending on what they look for. The graphics certainly aren't going to appeal to everyone. They're incredibly lo-fi with very little in the way of animation and whatnot, almost as if they could have come out of Microsoft Paint. Now personally, I don't mind this too much, as I like the DIY aesthetics of the whole thing. It certainly helps bring the story into focus, and that's the most important thing. And it effectively communicates just how barren and empty this whole world is. I didn't come to this game expecting the lush vistas of, say, To the Moon or what have you, and I don't know if the game would have been all that much improved if the game was on that sort of level. Still, yeah, I guess some people might be turned off by that. There's also not a great deal in the way of puzzles. They do exist, but they're not going to give you all that much trouble, and sometimes they're a bit too adventure gamey, such as, say, managing to find a can of rust remover in a frozen bin. Again, the puzzles are purposefully secondary here, the story is what's important, and I don't mind that. I play adventure games purely for the characters and the story, and I usually find that complicated puzzles that I can't figure out just get in my way. But then, some adventure game players like to have their brains massaged by complicated flights of fancy and tricks of the mind and what have you. And yeah, you won't find that here. Even if this was the first adventure game you'd ever played and you knew nothing about the genre, you wouldn't have any trouble getting through it. Now some could see that as positive, whereas for others it might be a negative. So yeah, it's all about the story. And as a story, Wizzard and Alice is really quite something. It's tough, it's dark, and it sure as hell isn't any kinda nice, but for me, it's essential. As I said previously, if you like post-apocalyptic stuff in any way, or if you just want a good story and you don't mind something that's probably going to make you a wee bit glum, then go for this, and don't let it fall under the radar. The technical limitations don't in any way stop it from being one of the strongest stories you'll find in a game this year. Now, Wizzard and Alice has been out on goodoldgames.com for a while now, but it just recently hit the Steam shelves, and as of this moment you can buy it for the cost of a sandwich. It's so worth it, and I urge you to give it a shot. I mean, sure, it may be the height of summer, but there are times when, even as the sausages sizzle on the barbecue and the picnic spreads get laid out, you just need a little bit of the cold heart of winter in your life. And there's few better ways to get that fix than Richard and Alice. Go bye. Thanks for watching my video. If you really liked it, maybe you could consider pressing the thumbs up icon that's just to the left here. Or maybe you could subscribe to the channel, if you so desire. If you're really crazy, maybe you could also follow me on Twitter, or even support me on Patreon. You know, all the usual stuff. Someone's got to pay the bills. As always, wherever you are, whoever you be, have a good one, take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.